but it's a great pleasure to be able to come and talk about what next, which I think is the, we won, now what, which I think is the theme that was very much in the Prime Minister's mind and every minister beneath him when the government won a majority that it didn't expect to win on general election day. They worked out, they gained every option virtually, apart from the one that actually happened. And so what now has to happen is they need to work out how to use the very short window of opportunity they have to address some of the core issues that exist within the health and care system that, in my view, were not addressed in 2010. So let me start with what happened in 2010, the wasted opportunity, in my view, of 2010, because that's an important part of the learning experience of what has to happen within the next few months, and I mean months, within the health and care sector. In 2010, I think it was true that 20 years after the introduction of purchaser-provider, localised management, all of that, there was a sense within the health and care system that this was the way it was going to be. There wasn't going to be a reversion to central planning, and that what was then required was an opportunity to start to work through the necessary change, not of the management structure, but of the care model, that good care and efficient use of money both demand of the health and care system. That was the opportunity that existed in 2010, and there was a recognition, some of it through clenched teeth, but there was a recognition right through the health and care economy that change was necessary, change in the way care was delivered was absolutely essential, resources were more constrained, let's get on with managing real change in the experience of patients and service users, what it felt like to rely upon a local care economy if in your years of increasing dependency. That was the opportunity, and in plain English, it was blown. The person who puts it most simply is Alan Milburn, who said that Labour Blairite Secretary of State for Health in the early years of this century, who said to me in about 2011, 2012, he said, "I don't understand why you guys are refighting all the battles we fought with all the vested interests, with the important difference that you're losing them." It was a sobering moment, because I think Alan, as quite often, had put his finger on what was happening. 5 years on, it came to a no-score draw. I think at the end, after the change of Secretary of State in the middle of the last Parliament, Jeremy Hunt played a skillful hand in getting us back. So that in 2015, 5 years on, many billions of pounds further on, we've had the same opportunity to carry through vital change in the way care is delivered. And that's what I want to focus our thoughts on as the end of this conference. Because when we talk about change in the health service, in the health and care system, very often people think, oh, that's another act of Parliament, changing the management structure all over again. You had, first of all, you had regional health, first you had regional health authorities, then you had strategic health authorities, and the name changes went on, and the churn was endless, but the landscape always ended up looking decidedly familiar. That was all a displacement activity, actually. The people who staffed this management cadre structure in the health service were so busy managing the change of the management structure that they didn't actually do the job that they were paid to do, which is change the way care is delivered. And that's now the challenge that in 2015, because there won't be another fundamental change in the way the system is managed, the management structure has to get on with the real day job of managing change in the way care is delivered. Changing the care model is that's the real story of health and care during the next period. Has to be for two unavoidable reasons. The first is quality. In SW1, this part of London, there's a number of people who fondly believe that the core activity of health and care is treating for cure people who are normally healthy. And of course there are people who go to see the health and care system for treatment and walk out cured, but they're a tiny minority of the workload of the health and care system. The health and care system exists in the great majority to care for, manage and support people who will never be cured of their condition, but where modern care techniques offer a real opportunity for prevention of further deterioration, actually early identification to prevent the condition developing in the first place, then helping individuals live with those conditions in order to get greater enjoyment out of their extended life. That's what this care system ought to be focused on doing, because those are typically the majority users of the system. And what we now need to do is to rethink how the service would be better delivered to those people, to deliver a service that was high quality when measured against the needs of those individuals. So challenge number one of the system is to set high standards of quality for all of those who rely on it, remembering that the majority of the people who rely on it are those with long-term complex conditions, long-term multiple conditions. Define standards of quality and then deliver those standards of quality consistently so that you avoid unnecessary episodes of acute illness. It's very often said that keeping people out of hospital is something we ought to do because it makes good economic sense, and I'll come on to that. But actually, this is a health system, and most of us would prefer to avoid being patients in acute hospitals if there's a way of achieving that avoidance. Delivering better health, rather than simply rationing access to the treatment of disease, ought to be the central focus of this system. So the first driver for necessary change in the way care is delivered is to be better at doing what it says on the tin. It's called the National Health Service, not the National Illness Service, defining a set of parameters that focus on people's health, on their enjoyment of life, on avoiding unnecessary illness. That's what quality means, and it's something that the system has been historically extremely bad at focusing on. That's one unavoidable driver. I said there were two. The other is economics. I think you've had some discussion already today about the so-called 8 billion. And this is all made to sound much, much more complicated than it really is. The economics of health and care are simple in this country and in most other countries. Left to itself, demand for these services, because of technical advance, because of rising proportion of elderly population, very familiar themes. Demand for these services rises if you cut away the decimal points, plus or minus 4% per annum. It has done since the foundation of the health service. There's no reason there's nothing going on in society that will flex that particularly up or particularly down. There is a long-term rise in demand for these services. Historically, we've met that by long-term, again, 3% growth in taxpayer resource into the system and 1% efficiency gain. 3 plus 1 equals 4. I used to talk throughout the last Parliament about what I called the Nicholson Challenge. First set out, actually, before the last election by Sir David Nicholson, then Chief Executive of the Health Service, when he said, that piece of economics doesn't work anymore. Demand will go on rising, because why wouldn't it? But the taxpayer hasn't got any more pounds to chip in. So if demand rises by 4% and real resource is in round numbers growing, is flat, not growing at all, instead of increasing efficiency in the system by 1% per annum to balance cost and demand, resource and demand, the only way you can achieve that balance is by achieving 4% efficiency gain year on year on year through the lifetime of the last Parliament. That was, in the days of the Nicholson challenge, what was summarised as 15 billion, said to be by McKinsey, between 15 and 20 billion pounds of something. It wasn't actually quite clear what, whether it was cuts or savings, because nobody was going to cut the budget. What it was efficiency gain to meet rising demand out of a budget that wasn't growing. Now, if you take 15 billion over 5 years and you project it forward for 10 years, instead of going from 2010 to 15, you go 2010 to 2020, surprise, surprise, 15 billion becomes 30 billion because demand goes on rising. And what Simon Stevens has said is that over the total the total resource required on an unchanged business model to meet rising demand of 30 billion, the health service, health and care system, can achieve efficiency gain which will set off 22 billion of that, the remainder being 8 billion, which Simon said had to come from the Exchequer, and which the government has committed to provide during the lifetime of this Parliament. So the economics of it are really very simple. In the first 2010 to 2015, to balance supply and demand, you needed to achieve 4% efficiency gain year on year through the whole health and care system. In the second half of this period, if the government chips in 8 billion, then the efficiency gain required on the long-term trend falls from 4% to 2%. Nobody really believes that the system achieved 4% efficiency gain between 2010 and 2015. It certainly didn't. But it did achieve some measure of economic efficiency gain, primarily by holding down wages of the people who were employed in the system. Looking forward over 10 years, you can't sustain that, which is why additional resource is required to allow, out of available resource, demand to be met. But if just thinking about one other point to make about the underlying economics is that 8 billion meets half the additional demand during the lifetime of this Parliament only if you start at zero. But actually the system's already overspending by around 2.5 billion a year. So 2.5 billion of the 8 billion has already been spent, or is already being spent, present tense. So the requirement for efficiency gain out of this health and care system over the rest of this Parliament is somewhere between 2 and 3% per annum, if demand is going to be met out of the budget that the government has made available. Which is why the Secretary of State and the Chief Executive of NHS England were at the NHS Confederation last week underlining to every health service manager who would listen that the core challenge facing the health and care system as we look forward during the lifetime of this Parliament is to deliver the efficiency gain required to live within that very constrained resource envelope. So those are the two challenges which management in the health and care system has no choice but to address. One, economics, delivering efficiency gain to meet demand out of available resources, and secondly, redesigning the care model in order to be better focused on the needs of today's patients and today's service users. I define them as separate challenges, but actually they're the same challenge. You don't deliver efficiency gain out of a set of organisations on the scale of the health and care system by doing it, or doing what you've been doing before, but doing it a bit cleverer. It's why all this stuff about agency nurses and better procurement, it's all so much common sense. But that's politics. It has very little to do with policy. Policy requires rethinking the way care is delivered, rethinking the business model of the delivery of health and care. In every industrial sector, stand back from it for a second, people very often say, oh, they think about the NHS or health and care as public service and therefore subject to a whole series of special rules that don't apply to the rest of what goes on in society and in the economy. It's absolute nonsense. It's nonsense on stilts. The NHS is an important piece of social policy. It's about securing equitable access to a key service industry. But the provision of health and care, as distinct from the National Health Service securing equitable access, the provision of health and care is just another form of economic activity. Every person in this room is employed, draws a salary, whether you're in the public-private sector, the not-for-profit sector or the private sector, draws a salary, is engaged in wealth creation in the health and care sector, meeting that rising demand that I was talking about. And what we have to get better at is thinking through the change in the care model that is demanded by the changing needs of our customers and the changing opportunities presented by technology. Every business in this room applies that thought process to its internal business planning process. We've become used, over the last half century in particular, but actually over a much longer period than that, we've become used to the idea that demand changes, technology changes, therefore businesses change. That's something that we live with and we regard as normal. In the other 90% of economic activity in the UK, there is no special set of rules that's been invented to apply to the 10% that deliver health and care. They're subject to exactly the same rules as the other 90%. We need to be better at thinking about the changing needs of our customers and the changing opportunities of technology. And if we spent less time obsessing about the management structure and more time delivering real change in the business model that meets the needs of our customers, our patients and our service users, then we'll deliver the economic challenge, and most importantly, we'll deliver the quality challenge of delivering a better service, better attuned to their needs, using their taxpayer pounds more effectively to deliver health rather than simply rationing access to the treatment of disease.